Welcome, dear listeners, to another episode of our scary stories. I am your guide through the shadowy realms of fear and suspense, taking you on a journey where the line between reality and nightmare is frighteningly blurred. If you're alone, I suggest you check over your shoulder, just to be sure. If you're not alone, well, let's hope it's someone you know. Prepare yourself for a tale that will make your blood run cold and send shivers down your spine. The veil between our world and the realm of horror lifts now, as we delve into our story, The Memory Reaper. Dr. Alistair Crane, a respected neurologist and compassionate human, worked in a clinic that smelled perennially of sterile white cloth. It was a scent that clung to his coat, a mark of his profession. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead in his stark office, creating sharp shadows that danced across his cluttered desk. The constant hum of the AC in the background and the scent of his lukewarm, forgotten coffee set the rhythm of his mundane life. He watched the city through his foggy office window, where the constant thrum of traffic was like a ceaseless heartbeat. The city was his patient, wounded by memories it could not forget. Crane was its healer, the genius who had stumbled upon a technology that could erase those crippling traumas. His first patient of the day was Marjorie, a woman haunted by a car crash that claimed her family. Her face, usually as pale as the clinic walls, turned a shade of ashen gray as she entered Crane's office. She was perpetually on edge, as though the slightest noise could shatter her. Every creaking door, every passerby's chatter, would stiffen her shoulders. Crane, a giant of a man with soft-spoken words and a gentler heart, greeted Marjorie with a comforting smile. "Marjorie, we'll ease the pain. Trust me," he told her, his baritone voice washing over her like a soothing balm. The promise of relief sparked a desperate hope in her eyes, mirroring the glimmering cityscape outside. Another patient, Jackson, bore the invisible scars of war. His piercing eyes held images of devastation that were not his to keep. The typical clatter and clamor of the city reminded him of gunshots and explosions, triggering tremors in his hands. Jackson was always on guard, as if the enemy might jump out from any corner. He looked at Crane and asked, a note of desperation in his voice, "Doc, can you promise this will work?" Crane's reassuring nod was all the answer Jackson needed. The day ended with a parade of similar faces and stories, all pinning their hopes on Crane. As night fell, the city's heartbeat slowed. The incessant honking gave way to the distant wail of a solitary car alarm. Crane, alone in his office, the taste of cold coffee lingering on his tongue, was left with the deafening silence of his thoughts. The collective trauma of his patients weighed heavily on him, but he was fueled by their hope. It was a burden he was more than willing to bear, for he believed in the dawn that his technology could bring. The following day arrived like an anxious heartbeat, the early morning sunlight washing over the city in waves of hesitant warmth. It was the day of reckoning for Crane's patients, the day where they would either reclaim their lives or plunge deeper into their individual abyss. Crane's clinic buzzed with an undercurrent of nervous anticipation. The rooms echoed with soft murmurs and muffled footsteps, punctuated by the faint hum of machinery warming up in the background. The sharp smell of antiseptic permeated the air, mixing with the faint aroma of Crane's fresh coffee. Marjorie was the first to undergo the procedure. She lay still on the clinical bed, her eyes wide and unblinking, reflecting the sterile lights overhead. The machine beside her, a sophisticated assembly of wires and electrodes, gave off a low hum like a predatory beast preparing to pounce. Crane's fingers moved deftly over the machine, his every touch calculated and precise. He wore a mask of concentration, his usual soft features hardened by the gravity of the moment. With the activation of the machine, a silence fell over the room, an eerie void of sound punctuated only by Marjorie's labored breathing. Minutes stretched into a tense eternity. The only indication of the passing time was the flicker of monitors displaying incomprehensible data. The air was electric with the potential of what this technology promised. Jackson watched from afar, his body rigid, his gaze locked onto the scene unfolding before him. His nostrils flared at the scent of antiseptic, a sensory onslaught that reminded him of medics in field hospitals. The tension strung him taut, a wire primed to snap at any moment. Then, with a beep that sounded like an electronic sigh of relief, the machine wound down. Marjorie lay there, her face blank and eyes distant. The sense of apprehension in the room receded, replaced with a hint of awe and disbelief. Had it worked? Crane broke the silence. "Marjorie," he called out gently. His voice echoed around the room, nudging the reality back into focus. Marjorie blinked, her focus shifting slowly onto Crane. She looked around the room, her gaze passing over the machine, the clinical bed, Jackson standing at a distance, and finally rested on Crane. A single tear slipped down her cheek, and she whispered, "I can't remember." The collective breath the room seemed to be holding released in a sigh of hope and wonder. This was just the beginning, but it was a promising one. For the first time in a long while, Marjorie and Jackson felt lighter, like the shackles of their memories had been unlocked. Their hearts echoed with Crane's quiet optimism, carrying the promise of a life unburdened by the ghostly chains of the past. The dawn of the next day brought a flurry of emotions, a hurricane of hope and relief for Marjorie and Jackson. They walked through the city streets, free from the chains of their agonizing memories. The city, once a catalyst for their nightmares, now pulsed with new energy, vibrant and full of life. Each honking car, each shouted vendor painted a picture of normalcy they'd yearned for. Marjorie visited the park, a place she'd avoided like a plague since the crash. The scent of blooming flowers didn't bring forth the haunting images of twisted metal and smoke. Instead, she felt the cool grass under her feet, heard the joyous laughter of children, the harmony of chirping birds, a symphony of life that echoed her newfound freedom. Jackson, on the other hand, walked amidst the bustling crowds, the constant chatter and clang not a trigger but a comforting murmur of life going on. The lingering scent of street food didn't remind him of military rations, but felt like an invitation to relish life's simple pleasures. For the first time in a long while, he felt a part of the world around him, not a haunted bystander. But as the days wore on, a shadow began to stretch over their euphoria. Jackson found himself relishing the piercing noise of his alarm clock, a sound that a few days before would have startled him. Marjorie caught herself staring too long at the car crash on the news, a sense of twisted fascination growing in the pit of her stomach. In the quiet corners of the day, both found their thoughts wandering down darker alleys. Jackson felt an unfamiliar surge of anger when he found his coffee order messed up. Marjorie, usually empathetic, found herself feeling indifferent to a friend's plight. These incidents, initially dismissed as quirks, began to form an undercurrent of something more sinister. Like black ink, they spread and deepened, marring their reclaimed lives. At night, the city lights that usually lulled them into a peaceful sleep now seemed to flicker ominously, casting long, grotesque shadows in their minds. An unsettling dread seeped into their lives, as though they were teetering on the edge of a precipice. As the last vestiges of sunlight retreated from the city, both Marjorie and Jackson were left alone in their apartments, a sense of unease growing like a storm on the horizon. The city's heartbeats now felt like distant drumming, a sinister rhythm accompanying their descent into a terror they had yet to comprehend. As the moon replaced the sun, casting long shadows over the city, Marjorie and Jackson grappled with their new reality. The thoughts brewing inside them seemed to take on a life of their own, unfurling and intensifying with each passing day. They weren't just thoughts anymore, they felt more like memories that weren't their own. Marjorie would often wake up from nightmares, her heart pounding and a cold sweat beating on her forehead. These dreams were vivid, filled with echoes of haunting laughter and blurred faces she did not recognize. The acrid smell of fear hung heavy in her room as she tried to recall the details, only to come face to face with scenes of a violent car chase she had never been a part of. On the other hand, Jackson found his mind tormented with gruesome scenes of violence that seemed alien to his military experience. The sounds of gunshots now morphed into the chilling screams of unsuspecting victims. The sense of terror that clawed at him wasn't from the battlefield, but from shadowy alleyways and deserted buildings he had never set foot in. Their once safe city now echoed with phantom screams and malicious whispers that clawed at their sanity. The usually comforting warmth of the morning sun now felt harsh, the vibrancy of the cityscape tainted by their torment. One evening, as the setting sun bathed the city in hues of orange and red, Jackson found himself confronted by an aggressive stranger. The surge of anger that washed over him was not his own. It felt darker, tainted with a cruel pleasure that froze his blood. Before he realized it, his fist had connected with the stranger's face. Jackson, as if waking from a trance, felt the chilling terror creeping in. This violence, this pleasure, wasn't his. A similar revelation shook Marjorie. One afternoon, while watching a news report about a tragic accident, she found herself smirking. The disturbing pleasure she felt at the sight of the twisted wreckage and the knowledge of lives lost was a cold slap of reality. This sinister joy was foreign to her, an unwelcome guest in her consciousness. As the city plunged into the darkness of the night, Marjorie and Jackson were left to grapple with their new reality. Their minds, once freed from their personal horrors, were now becoming a theater for someone else's malevolent past. The once promising dawn of their lives was being overshadowed by an impending darkness, and the city that had been a testament to their freedom now echoed with their quiet dread. As the dawn peeked through the curtain of the cityscape, Marjorie and Jackson found themselves standing at Crane's clinic doorstep, their hearts thudding in their chests. They were entangled in a growing web of sinister thoughts, a spiraling abyss they couldn't escape. The once comforting smell of the clinic now bore an ominous tone, a reminder of the beginning of their torment. In Crane's office, they poured out their fears, their voices trembling like brittle leaves in the wind. The fluorescent lights above cast a sterile glow on Crane's face as he listened to their experiences, his mind racing. He could smell the anxiety seeping off of them, a disturbing counterpoint to the familiar scent of antiseptic. The humming of the AC now seemed like a disquieting lullaby, a backdrop to their unnerving revelations. Marjorie described her cruel amusement at others' misfortunes, her voice barely above a whisper. Her confession hung in the air, a sour note that tainted the room's sterility. The soft chirping of the city birds outside felt like a jarring contrast to the storm brewing inside the office. Jackson spoke of his unfamiliar violent tendencies, the words tumbling out of him like stones down a hill. The room seemed to constrict around them, the city's normal clamor outside oddly muted, as if the walls themselves were leaning in to hear the horrifying transformation they were going through. Crane, initially skeptical, could not deny the tremors of fear in their voices, the genuine terror that shadowed their faces. His clinic, a place of hope and healing, was now the epicenter of a chilling mystery. The revelation that his procedure might have caused this disturbance was a chilling pill to swallow. He promised to delve into this mystery, to uncover the threads that connected their experiences to a past they never lived. The day's end found Crane in his office, his usual demeanor replaced by a grim determination. The city's skyline, viewed from his window, no longer seemed like a sea of glowing promises, but stood as a stark reminder of the terror that was unfolding within its heart. As darkness crept in, Crane's office was filled with the silent resolve to face the monstrous creation his technology might have birthed. The sinister underbelly of his groundbreaking achievement was revealing itself, and Crane knew he was the only one who could set things right. The steel skeleton of the city stood under the midnight sky, silent witnesses to the unfolding dread. Crane, engulfed in the phantom glow of his computer screen, was relentless in his pursuit. His fingers danced over the keyboard, delving into the dark corners of cyberspace, retracing the steps of his procedure, hunting for clues that would explain the haunting transformation of Marjorie and Jackson. He discovered an unsettling pattern, a series of executed serial killers, their psyches brimming with malevolent delight, paralleled the disturbing thoughts that Marjorie and Jackson described. His heart pounded in his chest, the smell of cold sweat mingling with the musty scent of his office. Could it be? Had he unknowingly implanted the spirits of these deceased monsters into his patients? Meanwhile, Marjorie sat in her dimly lit apartment, the city lights casting spectral shadows on her walls. A chilling news report about a hit-and-run accident sent ripples of twisted fascination through her. A knot of dread formed in her stomach as she recognized this morbid curiosity. It echoed the thoughts of an infamous car chase murderer, one Crane had mentioned in his research. Simultaneously, Jackson grappled with his own demons. The echoes of a brutal assault replayed in his mind, his heart pumping adrenaline, not from fear but from a chilling sense of exhilaration. He quickly recognized it as the signature mark of a notorious murderer, a name he'd stumbled upon in his military service. The realization was a jolt, his breath hitching in his throat, his apartment suddenly feeling claustrophobic. The sinister transformation of their thoughts painted a terrifying picture. They weren't just victims of a rogue technology, but potential hosts to the remnants of ruthless killers. The idea was as intriguing as it was horrifying, the implications of which were too terrifying to fathom. Had the memories they destroyed created a void for something more sinister to enter? As the city slept under the night sky, Crane's office flickered with the ghostly light of his determination. His pursuit of answers was a beacon in the dark abyss they had all plunged into. He knew he had to unravel this mystery and free Marjorie and Jackson from the haunting shadows of these sinister spirits. It was a race against time in a city that was oblivious to the battle being fought within its heart. In the muted grayness of the early morning, Crane's office stood as a solitary beacon, the desperate hunt for a solution seeping into the dawn. Each line of code he dove into felt like traversing a shadowed labyrinth, the chilling implications of his discoveries weaving an increasingly intricate web. Unearthing the profiles of the executed serial killers, he found their disturbing life stories echoed in Marjorie and Jackson's new behavioral patterns. The meticulous planning of a car chase murderer aligned with Marjorie's fascination, while the violent impulses of a notorious killer mirrored in Jackson's sudden outbursts. On the other side of the city, Marjorie paced her apartment, the early sunlight casting long shadows that danced with her growing fears. The vibrant cityscape outside her window now seemed distorted, each honk, each pedestrian, a distorted reflection of her internal chaos. A morbid curiosity gnawed at her, a cold reminder of the phantom memories that seemed to possess her. Simultaneously, Jackson grappled with a rage that was not his own. The city's morning hustle, once a comforting symphony of normalcy, now seemed to feed his alien anger. His reflection in the mirror was the same, yet the eyes staring back at him were those of a stranger, a vessel for a violence he did not own. As Crane unraveled the shocking links, he felt a heavy responsibility pressing onto him. His clinic, a place that had promised a fresh start, had unknowingly served as the gateway to an unthinkable horror. He was dealing with an unexplored dimension of memory transfer, a Pandora's box he'd accidentally opened. The unsettling aroma of the morning coffee in his office was a stark contrast to the chilling revelations surfacing on his computer screen. As the city came alive with the break of day, Crane, Marjorie, and Jackson were entwined in a silent struggle against the unfolding terror. The echo of the deceased killers was becoming louder, a threatening drumbeat to which their lives were now synced. Crane knew that understanding this unforeseen connection was not just about salvaging his technology anymore. It was a race to save Marjorie and Jackson from the escalating menace within them. The city continued its rhythmic hum, oblivious to the ominous undercurrent flowing beneath its surface. The day was draped in an unsettling duality, the mundane chaos of urban life echoing against the backdrop of a silent struggle against an unseen terror. Marjorie found herself tracing the routes of infamous car chases from the news, her fingers moving with a familiarity that wasn't hers. Each street and corner seemed eerily familiar, a chilling echo of a past life that she had never lived. The city she had known was now transforming into a twisted map of a serial killer's past. Jackson, on the other side of the city, had to resist the gnawing urge to engage in violent confrontations. His once disciplined self was wrestling with an alien rage that seemed to swell with the city's rising heartbeat. He looked at his reflection in the glass windows of the city buildings, his own eyes mirroring an unfamiliar ferocity. In his clinic, Crane was knee-deep in research, his mind racing to keep pace with the relentless ticking of the clock. The city's sunshine seemed to mock his growing fear, the golden rays contrasting against the dark shadows creeping into their lives. The once pleasant scent of his clinic now held an unsettling edge, a symbol of the horror his procedure had unwittingly unleashed. Crane's investigation unveiled another piece of the puzzle. The energy source for the memory transfer procedure had originated from a prison's condemned wing, the exact location where these serial killers had been executed. An icy shiver crawled up his spine as he realized the unthinkable. Their cognitive echoes had somehow been captured in the energy source. As evening crept in, casting long shadows over the cityscape, a sense of urgency tightened around them. The city, with its vibrant life and glowing lights, was becoming the stage for a haunting drama that was invisible to its inhabitants. The fight against the ghostly echoes of the past was intensifying, a battle where the line between reality and memory was blurring more with each passing day. Nightfall descended over the city, its vibrant heartbeat becoming a haunting lullaby to the unfolding nightmare. The twinkling city lights stood as silent sentinels, their glow a stark contrast to the darkness seeping into the lives of Marjorie, Jackson, and Crane. Marjorie found herself standing at the site of an infamous car chase, her heart thrumming with a perverse thrill that belonged to another. The city streets beneath her feet seemed to echo with the roar of engines and the cacophony of fear, an ominous reenactment of a dreadful past. Across the city, Jackson stared at his clenched fists, feeling a foreign power pulsating beneath his skin. The The city's slumbering peace seemed to poke at his boiling rage, the eerie quiet a chilling reminder of the violent echoes that had found a home within him. In his clinic, Crane's screens bathed the room in a spectral glow, casting long, terrifying shadows. The silence of his clinic was a stark contrast to the chaos unraveling on his screens. The once comforting scent of his research was now laced with a sense of dread that permeated every corner of the room. The threads of their plight were intertwined, knotted together by the dark fate of the deceased killers. Crane's research pointed towards a terrifying conclusion. The residual energy from the execution chamber had imprinted itself onto his memory erasure process, dragging the echoes of these killers into the minds of his patients. His once revolutionary procedure had transformed into a monstrous creation, a Frankenstein of technology that had resurrected the ghosts of the past. As he dug deeper into the case files, the magnitude of his unintentional error weighed heavily on him. The lives of Marjorie and Jackson were hanging by a thread, their minds a battlefield for control against the intruding echoes. As the city moved towards another dawn, Crane knew time was running out. Marjorie and Jackson were becoming entangled deeper in the web of the past. It was a race against the clock in a city that remained oblivious to the terror hidden beneath its glowing skyline. The mirror of their reality was shattering, and Crane was the only one who could mend it. As dawn seeped into the city, the first light pierced the glass walls of Crane's clinic. The serene morning was a far cry from the storm that was brewing within its boundaries. The smell of fresh coffee did little to mask the ominous undercurrent running through Crane's veins as he geared up for the final showdown. Marjorie was caught in a horrifying reenactment, her body piloting a stolen car through the city's labyrinthine streets, the adrenaline rush mirroring a thrilling chase from the memories of a murderer. Each tire screech was a cruel reminder of the sinister force puppeteering her actions. In stark contrast, Jackson stood in a deserted alleyway, the city's morning calm feeding his alien anger. His fists tightened, the violent urges inherited from a dead killer pulsating with a frightening intensity. His own reflection in a nearby puddle seemed distorted, a haunting symbol of his loss of control. Back in his clinic, Crane was fighting his own battle. His screen was a window into the dark abyss of his procedure's unintended consequences. He had to reverse the memory transfer to silence the echoes of the dead that were threatening to drown Marjorie and Jackson. He toiled to create an antidote to the horror he had inadvertently spawned. Each code he wrote, a ray of hope against the terrifying darkness. The city, caught in its daily bustle, served as a stage for their silent struggles. The urban symphony of honking cars and the chatter of the crowd was a stark contrast to the intense battles being fought behind the city's glass facades. As the day raced towards twilight, a sense of urgency gripped them all. Crane, armed with his revised codes, set out to reclaim his patients from the grip of the deceased killer's echoes. Marjorie and Jackson, now more entwined with the killer's memories than their own, were running out of time to save their minds from the monstrous invasion. As nightfall approached, the city transformed into the eye of the storm. Crane knew he was their only hope, their lives hinging on his ability to rectify his error. He had to win this race against time, to restore Marjorie and Jackson's realities, and banish the haunting echoes back to their graves, where they truly belonged. Riding on the pulsating rhythm of his adrenaline, Crane dialed the police. His voice was a frantic whisper as he described his patients, pleading with the authorities to find them before it was too late. The urban heartbeat of the city seemed distant, drowned out by the frenzied beat of his own heart. As night stretched its ominous veil over the city, a police squad traced Marjorie and Jackson, the regular hum of the city serving as a stark contrast to the simmering chaos within them. They were found, disoriented, trapped within the echoes of a gruesome past they didn't belong to. They were brought back to Crane's clinic, a beacon of hope amidst the encroaching darkness. Their bodies were secured onto the sterile clinic beds, their minds wandering within the labyrinth of a killer's memory. Crane worked with relentless determination, his fingers dancing across his computer's keys. The room was filled with an electric tension, the hum of the machine punctuated by the unconscious patient's ragged breaths. Every second mattered in this twisted game of control. With a final keystroke, he initiated the procedure. The room bathed in an ethereal glow as the procedure whirred to life, the pulsating energy humming a solemn promise of salvation. Marjorie and Jackson's bodies jolted as the machine whirred louder, their faces etched with a flicker of pain, a mirror of their internal battle. The machine was fighting back against the monstrous invasion, its pulsations a defiant war cry against the echoes from the grave. As the machine's hum finally quieted, and their breaths returned to a steadier rhythm, Crane found himself in the eerie calm of the storm's aftermath. They were no longer tormented by the sinister echoes, their minds restored to their rightful owners. Exhausted, Crane turned to his window, his reflection ghostly against the backdrop of the night-washed city. As he questioned the cost of his groundbreaking technology, he couldn't help but wonder, in erasing the traumatic memories, had he unwittingly left the door ajar for something far more terrifying to creep in. The night was a pitch-black canvas to his disturbing thoughts, the silent city oblivious to the storm that had just passed. As Crane dwelled in the chilling aftermath of his creation, one haunting question echoed in the quiet. What horrors truly lurk in the crevices of our human minds? Sleep tight, my friends. Keep the lights on and check under your beds, for who knows what lurks in the darkness. We hope you've enjoyed this chilling journey on our scary stories, even as your pulse races and the shadows in the room seem to close in. Join us again for another dive into the realm of fear, where your nightmares come alive. Until then, remember there's always something watching from the corners of your eyes. Good night, dear listeners. Sweet dreams or perhaps chilling nightmares. This is our Scary Stories signing off for tonight.